These are not my children. The words sliced through the delivery room, louder than the monitors, sharper than the smell of antiseptic. Jonathan Whitmore stood frozen, his polished shoes squeaking against the tile as he backed away from the glass. Inside the bassinet, 3 tiny bodies shifted under white blankets. Their skin glowed soft and brown, a color that betrayed every lie he had told himself for 9 months. Elena Brown turned toward him, her face pale from exhaustion. Confusion clouded her dark eyes. Her breath hitched. The steady beep beside her quickened, echoing her racing heart. A doctor bent to a nurse, voice low but cruel. A man like him would never claim children like these. The words stung more than the sterile air. Elena's hand trembled as she reached toward the glass. Her voice failed. Love should have been enough. Instead, ambition and fear had already stolen the father from her sons. And this is only the beginning. What happens when a man trades family for ambition? Subscribe now and tell me, what do you think awaits Jonathan, Elena, and the children in the years to come? Jonathan pushed through the hospital doors, the cold night air hitting his face like a slap. He didn't look back. His phone was already at his ear. "Erase everything," he told his lawyer. His voice was flat, steady, as if he were closing a business deal. The city lights flickered across his pale skin. He tugged at his jacket, noticing a faint smear of blood on the sleeve. For a moment his eyes lingered on it, but instead of guilt, only annoyance crossed his face. He slipped the jacket off and tossed it into the backseat of his car, like trash. Inside, the engine purred, warm and detached. Jonathan gripped the steering wheel, his reflection staring back from the glass. To him, this was not a family left behind. This was a problem solved, an image protected. While 3 infants struggled for their first breaths, their father's first choice was erasure. And his ambition had just become stronger than blood. Elena lay back against the thin hospital pillow, her body weak, her spirit trembling. The room was quiet now, no footsteps, no voices, only the soft rhythm of newborn breaths. She pulled the bassinets closer, her arms shaking as she gathered all 3 into her embrace. Their tiny fists curled against her chest, their warmth pressing into her heart. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from pain, but from the weight of knowing she would face this alone. Her voice cracked as she whispered into the silence, words meant only for them. "You are everything to me," she said, holding tighter. "All that I have, all that I am. No matter who walks away, I will never leave you." The monitor beside her slowed, steadying with her vow. In that fragile moment, Elena's tears were not weakness. They were a promise, sealed in love stronger than the absence of a father. Crystal chandeliers glittered above Jonathan Whitmore as he raised his glass. Laughter echoed around the long table. Politicians and bankers leaned close, shaking his hand, calling him a rising star. Silver cutlery clinked against porcelain, the sound of power and privilege. Jonathan smiled, his image flawless, his future untouchable. Across the city, Elena Brown sat in a cramped apartment lit by one dim lamp. The wallpaper peeled at the corners, the radiator groaned. Dinner was a single pot of noodles split 4 ways. She blew on each spoonful, cooling it before pressing it to her son's lips. On the floor, crayons scattered over a torn notebook. Little hands sketched clumsy hearts and a figure with wide arms. "That's you, Mama," one boy said, proud of the drawing. Elena smiled through tired eyes, kissing the top of his head. 2 worlds moved forward that night. One chased status. The other survived on love. The classroom buzzed with the scratch of pens and the hum of old lights. Elena Brown's eyes blurred as she tried to focus on the page. Her body gave out before her will. She slumped forward, her forehead landing against the open notebook. "Hey, are you okay?" A classmate touched her arm, panic in his voice. Elena stirred, fighting to open her eyes. Sweat beaded on her temple, her lips dry, her breath shallow. She forced herself upright, though her head spun. The room tilted, the letters on the page swimming out of reach. Her hand clutched the desk as she whispered, voice cracked but firm. "I have to finish. I have to graduate. For my 3 boys." The words carried more strength than her body could hold. Around her, the class fell silent. In her exhaustion lived a vow. Even on the edge of collapse, Elena's fight was never for herself, but for them. A glossy magazine lay across a mahogany table. On the cover, Jonathan Whitmore's face beamed beneath bold letters. Forbes 40 under 40. The future of power. The article praised his brilliance, his wealth, his vision. Cameras caught him stepping out of black cars, shaking hands with senators, raising a glass to the future he claimed to own. Miles away, Elena Brown stood at her kitchen counter, a different paper in her hands. The letterhead read, "Final Notice." The words demanded money she didn't have. Her eyes scanned the numbers, heavy and sharp. She exhaled slowly, folding the bill with care. Then she glanced at her 3 sons huddled over a coloring book. Their laughter filled the small room, pushing back the silence. A faint smile curved her lips. She slipped the letter into a drawer and whispered to herself, "We'll make it." One man chased glory. One woman carried hope. Their paths were destined to collide. The alarm rang before dawn. Elena Brown tied her worn sneakers, slipped on a faded nurse's uniform, and left her boys with a neighbor before heading to the hospital. Hours passed in fluorescent light, checking vitals, lifting patients, answering endless calls. Her back ached, but quitting was never an option. When her shift ended, she didn't go home. She changed into a black apron, hair tied back, and carried trays in a crowded diner. Plates clattered, voices shouted orders, and the tips barely filled her pocket. By midnight, her legs trembled, but her mind stayed fixed on 3 little faces waiting at home. Back in the apartment, she knelt on the floor. One son cried softly. The diaper bag was empty, so she tore an old towel into strips, folding them with careful hands. She whispered, "I know, baby. I know." Her exhaustion was heavy, yet her love made her stronger than her hunger, stronger than her fear. The hallway smelled of old paint and fried food. Elena unlocked her door, shoulders slumped from the double shift. Before she could set down her bag, Mrs. Carter from next door was already inside, rocking the babies in her arms. "They were angels tonight," the older woman said with a tired smile. Her hands were rough, her eyes kind. She kissed the boys on their foreheads as if they were her own. Elena's lips trembled with gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Mrs. Carter shook her head firmly. "Don't thank me, child. We have to carry each other. This system wasn't built for us. If we don't hold one another up, no one will." Her words sank deep into Elena's heart. For a moment, the weight on her shoulders lifted. She wasn't completely alone. In a world that had already turned its back, a neighbor's embrace became proof that family can be chosen, too. The night was quiet on the Harlem block. Daniel Brown jogged home with headphones in, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. A flash of red and blue split the darkness. Tires screeched. "Stop right there," a voice barked. 2 officers jumped from their car, guns drawn. The beam of a flashlight cut across Daniel's face, freezing him in place. "I didn't do anything," he shouted, hands in the air. His chest heaved, sweat mixing with fear. One officer shoved him against the hood. The cold metal burned his skin. The siren pulsed, washing his brown skin in alternating red and blue. To the officers, he was not a teenager heading home. He was a suspect. Neighbors opened windows, watching in silence, powerless. Daniel's heart pounded as the cuffs locked around his wrists. In that blinding light, he was no longer a boy. He was a target, and injustice had chosen him at random. The police station buzzed with phones and heavy footsteps. Elena burst through the door, her coat half-buttoned, her voice shaking with fury. "My son is not a criminal," she cried, eyes burning into the officer behind the desk. "He was walking home, that's all." The man barely looked up, shuffling papers. "Ma'am, he matched a description." Elena slammed her hand down, her body trembling but her voice unbroken. "No, he matches my description. He is my boy. He is smart, he is kind, and one day he will change this world. You can try to paint him as less, but he was born for more." The room grew quiet. Even Daniel, sitting in the corner with cuffs at his wrists, lifted his head. Strength poured out of her exhaustion. A mother declaring truth in a place built on suspicion. And tell me, if it were your child, would you stay silent, or would you fight like Elena? The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of an old laptop. The screen flickered, its glow casting sharp lines across 3 determined faces. David typed furiously. Marcus sketched designs on scrap paper, and Daniel leaned close, debugging every line of code. The table was cluttered with empty noodle cups, crumpled notes, and wires taped together. But to them, it looked like possibility. Each click of the keyboard was a step toward something bigger than the cramped room that held them. "Imagine if this works," Marcus whispered, eyes bright. "We could build something the world actually needs." David grinned, tapping the screen. Not if, when. Daniel cracked a smile, exhaustion heavy in his eyes but fire alive in his voice. "We'll show them all. Starting here, starting now." While the city slept, three brothers chased a dream. In their hands, ambition turned into a plan, and in their hearts, hope grew louder than hunger. In a glass tower high above the city, Jonathan Whitmore leaned back in his leather chair. A briefcase slid across his desk, its metal latches clicking open to reveal neat stacks of cash. The man across from him smiled nervously, waiting for a nod. Jonathan didn't hesitate. He signed the contract with a smooth stroke of his pen. The paper gave approval for a landfill site, one that would bury toxic waste near a struggling community. The man murmured, "There might be protests." Jonathan closed the briefcase with a snap, his expression cold. Protests fade. Profits last. It's just business. Below, children would drink poisoned water, families would cough through nights of sickness. But in Jonathan's office, the only sound was the pouring of champagne into crystal glasses. He raised his glass to the skyline, the city shimmering with blind admiration. To the world, he was a visionary. To those beneath his shadow, he was destruction wearing a suit. The living room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a single lamp. On the wall hung a framed photo of Elena in her nursing uniform, smiling despite the weight of years. Her sons stood before it, shoulders touching, eyes steady. David placed his hand on the worn wooden table. "We can't wait for chances to come to us." Marcus nodded, his voice firm. "Then we make our own. A company that belongs to us, built from nothing, built for something real." Daniel looked up at their mother's picture, his jaw tight. "She gave us everything. Now it's our turn to give her a reason to be proud." One by one, they stacked their hands together over the table, sealing the vow. "We build it together," David said. "We make it last," Marcus added. "We never give up," Daniel finished. Three brothers, one promise. A bond forged in love, sharper than the world's doubt. The apartment was crowded with wires, notebooks, and the stale smell of cold pizza. David, Marcus, and Daniel hunched over their laptops, eyes red from nights without sleep. Fingers flew across keyboards, code spilling faster than the hours they lost. Success wasn't here yet, but the fire in their voices said it was coming. Cut to downtown Manhattan. Crystal glasses clinked as Jonathan Whitmore raised a toast at a rooftop party. The skyline shimmered behind him, laughter circling like smoke. For him, victory was measured in deals signed and names dropped, not in sleepless nights or sacrifice. Back in Harlem, the brothers pushed through fatigue. A cheer broke out as their prototype finally worked. They high-fived, collapsing in laughter, crumbs of cold pizza flying. Two worlds, one built on shortcuts, the other on sweat. Novatech had been born in a cramped apartment, and though no one else could see it yet, something powerful had just begun to rise. The morning sun slipped through the blinds, landing on a stack of newspapers outside the corner store. Across the front page, bold letters shouted, "Three brothers from Harlem create breakthrough tech." Beneath the headline, a photo showed David, Marcus, and Daniel standing side by side, awkward in borrowed suits, grinning like boys who had just changed the rules. Inside their apartment, Elena held the paper with trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the words, her chest swelling with pride. She pressed the photo against her heart, whispering, "You did it." Neighbors knocked on the door, holding copies of their own. Cheers filled the hallway, kids pointing at the picture, shouting, "That's them!" For the first time, the brothers felt the world look their way, not with doubt, but with belief. It wasn't billions, it wasn't fame, but it was proof that the dream had left their small apartment and stepped into history. Jonathan Whitmore sat in the back of a black car, the leather seat smooth beneath his tailored suit. He unfolded the morning paper, eyes landing on the headline about three Harlem brothers building a tech breakthrough. He smirked, the corner of his mouth curling with disdain. "Startups," he muttered, shaking his head. "Nothing but bubbles waiting to burst." He folded the paper neatly, as if the story meant nothing. His assistant glanced at the article, curiosity flashing across her face. "It seems like people are paying attention," she offered carefully. Jonathan waved the thought away, pulling out his phone to check the stock market. Attention fades. Real power doesn't come from scrappy kids with laptops. It comes from owning the system. Outside the tinted window, billboards flashed ads for innovation and change. Jonathan didn't notice. The irony was already written. The empire he clung to would one day bow to the sons he had denied. Flashbulbs burst along the red carpet in Washington, D.C. The Global Leadership Gala had drawn every senator, CEO, and power broker within reach of the nation's capital. Cameras swiveled as Jonathan Whitmore stepped out of his car, polished and unshaken. Reporters called his name, microphones stretched forward. He gave them the same rehearsed smile, the one that looked both warm and untouchable. Beside him, a senator clasped his hand, pulling him in for a photograph. Another politician leaned close, whispering praise about his influence and generosity. Jonathan soaked in every second. The cameras captured him laughing, trading handshakes, his tuxedo sharp under the spotlights. To the world, he was prestige personified, the face of power climbing higher still. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glittered, orchestras played, and champagne flowed without end. No one knew the stage was being set for something greater than politics or money. Jonathan's perfect image was about to crack under the brightest lights of all. The ballroom hushed as the host stepped onto the golden stage. Spotlights dimmed, leaving only the microphone glowing under the weight of anticipation. Glasses stopped clinking. Conversations froze mid-sentence. All eyes lifted. "Tonight," the MC announced, his voice rolling through the hall, "we honor visionaries who have reshaped how the world thinks about progress, equity, and technology." Applause rippled politely, but the pause that followed stretched long, thick with expectation. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his phone, only half listening. The MC raised the envelope, smiling toward the crowd. "Please welcome this year's recipients of the Social Impact Innovator Award." The hall leaned forward as one. "The founders of Novatech." For a second, silence. Then the ballroom erupted in cheers and thunderous applause. Jonathan's head snapped up, the name cutting through his distraction like glass. His smile faltered. His fingers froze mid-scroll. He knew that name, though he hadn't spoken it in decades. The applause rose like a wave as three young men stepped onto the stage. Their suits were sharp, their posture steady, their faces alive with confidence. The screen behind them lit up with the word Novatech, glowing in bold white letters. Jonathan Whitmore's hand froze on his champagne glass. His eyes widened as if the air had been punched out of him. He knew those faces. The curve of the jaw, the height, the unmistakable trace of his own reflection. David adjusted the microphone. Marcus offered a small smile. Daniel raised a hand in thanks to the roaring crowd. To everyone else in the room, they were the future of technology. To Jonathan, they were ghosts made flesh, the past he had buried stepping into the brightest light of all. His chest tightened. The sound of applause blurred into static. The sons he had denied now stood before him, celebrated as men the world could not ignore. David Brown stepped forward, his hand steady on the microphone. The cheers softened into silence as he looked across the ballroom. His voice carried with calm conviction. "We started in a cramped apartment," he began. "3 brothers, 1 old laptop, and a dream too big for the space we lived in." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the audience, not mocking, but warm. David's eyes shone as he continued. "We didn't have investors. We didn't have connections. What we had was each other, and a mother who believed we could reach higher than the walls around us." The room erupted in applause, strangers rising to their feet. Jonathan sank lower in his chair, his throat dry, his past clawing its way into the present. David smiled, letting the crowd breathe in his words. Every barrier became fuel. Every doubt became fire. And standing here tonight, we know the impossible is possible. Tell me, wouldn't you cheer too if you saw hope like this finally break through? Marcus Brown stepped to the microphone, his voice steady but his eyes wet with emotion. The crowd leaned closer, sensing the weight of his words before they came. "We owe our success to one person," he said, pausing as silence spread across the ballroom. "Our mother." Gasps softened into a hush. Marcus continued, his voice stronger. "She worked double shifts while studying at night. She skipped meals so we could eat. She carried us when the world wanted to break us. Every line of code we wrote, every step we took, was because she showed us what strength looks like." The audience rose to their feet, applause thundering through the hall. Some wiped tears as they clapped, touched by the raw truth. Jonathan's chest burned as he watched the woman he once discarded being lifted high by the sons he left behind. Marcus smiled toward the crowd. "If you see greatness in us, it's because she put it there first." The ballroom doors opened and every head turned. Elena Brown stepped forward, draped in a simple but elegant gown, her shoulders straight, her chin lifted. Years of exhaustion had not broken her. Tonight, she shone. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then applause swelled, rolling across the hall like thunder. Guests rose from their chairs, some clapping, others wiping at their eyes. Cameras flashed, capturing the face of a woman who had carried 3 boys through struggle and sacrifice. Her sons extended their hands toward her, pride glowing in their smiles. She joined them on stage, her presence grounding their triumph with a deeper truth. This was not just their victory, it was hers. Jonathan's glass slipped in his grip, his eyes locked on the woman he once abandoned. In front of the world, she was no secret. She was the heart of the story, and the world was finally giving her the honor she had always deserved. The applause faded into murmurs as Daniel Brown stepped forward, his gaze scanning the crowd. His words of thanks paused midway when his eyes caught a familiar figure at the back of the room. Jonathan Whitmore sat rigid in his chair, his jaw tight, his glass untouched. Daniel's brow furrowed, something stirring deep inside. He tilted his head, studying the man as if pulling at a memory he couldn't quite name. "You look familiar?" Daniel said slowly, voice carrying through the microphone. The room shifted, curiosity rippling through the audience. A hush settled, anticipation pressing like weight against the walls. Jonathan forced a smile, but his hands clenched the armrest. "I don't believe we've met." Daniel's eyes narrowed, his instinct refusing to let go. "Maybe not, but I've seen that face before." The tension thickened. Guests leaned forward, sensing the air change. On stage, a son unknowingly stood face to face with the father he had never known. A heavy silence swept across the ballroom. Daniel's words still lingered in the air, but it was Elena who finally broke it. Her hands trembled as she stepped closer to the microphone, her breath uneven, her eyes fixed on Jonathan. "Boys," her voice cracked, then steadied. "There's something you need to know." The audience leaned forward, curiosity turning into tension. Jonathan's face drained of color, his lips parting as if to stop her. Elena's eyes filled with years of pain and courage. She drew a long breath, then spoke the words she had carried alone for decades. "This man," she said, pointing toward Jonathan, her voice trembling but clear. "This man is your father." The hall gasped, the sound sharp and collective. Glasses clinked, whispers surged like waves. On stage, the brothers froze, shock flashing across their faces. The truth had been buried for 25 years. Now, under the brightest lights, it erupted where the world could see. The words struck like thunder. For a heartbeat, the ballroom forgot how to breathe. David, Marcus, and Daniel stepped back in unison, their polished shoes scraping against the stage floor. Their eyes darted between Elena and Jonathan, searching for an answer, a denial, anything to undo what had just been spoken. But Jonathan sat frozen, unable to rise, his face pale under the bright lights. The audience, moments earlier roaring with applause, fell into complete silence. The orchestra in the corner lowered their instruments. Waiters stood still, trays hovering mid-air. Every whisper had died. The pause stretched long, heavy enough to crush the room. The only sound was the sharp inhale of the brothers, their chests rising and falling as if they had been struck. It was no longer a gala. It was a reckoning, and everyone knew they were witnessing a family's deepest wound tear open before the world. Marcus was the first to find his voice. His fists clenched at his sides, his chest heaving with the weight of years he hadn't even known were stolen from him. He stepped forward, his words sharp, cutting through the stunned silence. "You chose money. You chose ambition. You chose your spotless reputation over us." Jonathan flinched but said nothing. His eyes flickered toward the audience as though searching for an exit, a place to hide. Marcus's voice grew louder, his pain spilling into rage. "We were children, 3 newborns who needed a father, and what did you give us? Silence, abandonment, a legacy of shame you thought we'd never discover." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, the truth pressing down like heat. Some eyes turned on Jonathan with disgust. Marcus pointed straight at him, no longer trembling. "You wanted the world's applause, but you abandoned the only people who ever should have called you Dad." Jonathan finally rose from his chair, his face strained, his voice unsteady. He raised his hands as though words could soften decades of absence. "I can help you," he said, forcing a smile that never touched his eyes. "I have money, influence, connections. Whatever you need, I can provide it." The ballroom murmured, a low wave of disbelief rolling through the crowd. To them, it sounded less like an apology and more like a transaction. Jonathan's tone grew desperate. "You don't understand. I can open doors. I can fund your projects. I can make everything easier for you." On stage, the brothers stood stone still, their expressions hardening with every word. He had walked away from their first cries, and now he thought dollars could replace years. In his plea, there was no father, only a man bargaining with currency. And in that moment, the audience felt it too, disgust at a heart that mistook love for profit. David stepped forward, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on Jonathan. The weight of a lifetime pressed into his voice, sharp and clear. "We don't need your money," he said, each word steady like a hammer striking stone. The audience leaned in, holding their breath. Jonathan opened his mouth to speak, but David didn't let him. His voice rose, breaking with emotion. "What we needed was a father, 25 years ago, someone to hold us when we cried, someone to stand with Mom when the world turned its back, someone proud to call us his sons." The room erupted in hushed gasps, every sentence cutting deeper than any accusation could. David's eyes glistened, but his tone never wavered. "That moment is gone forever, and no amount of wealth will buy it back." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with catharsis, with the raw truth that could not be undone. The silence shattered when a firm hand touched Jonathan's shoulder. Security had arrived, their dark suits and steady expressions leaving no room for argument. "Sir, you'll need to come with us," one said quietly. Jonathan's lips parted, desperate to protest, but the weight of hundreds of eyes pinned him down. He lowered his gaze, his once proud shoulders sagging. The man who had built an empire now looked smaller than ever, shuffling toward the exit with guards at his side. Gasps and whispers trailed behind him. Some guests shook their heads. Others snapped photos, the flashbulbs sealing his humiliation. On stage, the brothers stood together, watching the man who had abandoned them vanish into the shadows. Elena's hand rested on David's shoulder, steady and strong. Jonathan didn't look back. He couldn't. His legacy of power and wealth meant nothing now. The world wasn't applauding him anymore. It was watching him fall. Jonathan sat alone in his vast mansion, the chandeliers unlit, the silence pressing in heavier than marble walls. His glass of wine stood untouched. The man who once commanded boardrooms and headlines now had no one left to hear his voice. Across town, Elena stood in the glow of cameras. Her sons, no longer boys, but men she had raised with love and fire, wrapped their arms around her. The crowd cheered, the flashes bursting like stars, celebrating the family that had endured and triumphed. A voice carried over the montage. He gained fortune and fame, but lost the right to live within love. In the end, that is the only wealth that matters. The screen faded on Elena's radiant smile, the brothers standing tall beside her. Because sometimes justice doesn't come in courtrooms. It comes in the lives we choose to build. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell us, what did this ending mean to you?